Hey everybody, it's Jesse again, and welcome to another edition of Gen X Thinks. Right off the bat, I want to talk about the movie I watched last night. I watched Footloose, the original Kevin Bacon version, from 1984. And there's a scene when the leading girl, she gets to the car hop, the hamburger place, with her boyfriend, and she takes out this little boom box and puts it on the hood of his truck and starts playing a song. And then the camera starts panning around, and all these people are, like tapping their feet and bobbing their heads and stuff to the music. And then it gets out to the parking lot, and there's a couple of guys out there like doing the old classic white guy dance, and it just cracked me up. It just reminded me that that was before we all realized we couldn't dance. It really started to sinking in that I probably couldn't dance in like the mid '90s, but I just couldn't believe that they had that in a movie. You know what I mean? That was supposed to be a cool movie, and those guys were supposed to be cool. So it really cracked me up. Back then, our black and brown friends were too nice to tell us that we couldn't dance, and they would just let us do that stuff. Nowadays, if some kid did that at a party or something, he'd look up and everybody would have their phones out unfriending him. Maybe one guy would be live streaming him for his anthropological class, so like ancient white or Caucasian mating rituals or something. I don't know. But yeah, that's that whole era back then. We were just free. We didn't judge each other too much, not as a group. We would judge individuals, kids do that, but just as a group, we didn't do that too much. I don't remember it now. If you had a different experience, I'm not, but that's just how I remember it. And then the other scene, my favorite scene in the movie, is when they're playing chicken with the tractors. You remember that? The song by Bonnie Tyler comes on, Holding Out for a Hero, and the tractors are going toward each other, and Kevin Bacon tries to bail because he starts getting scared, and he tries to bail, but his shoelace gets stuck on the pedal of the tractor. So he actually wins the race because of his shoelace, and he gets, they're celebrating at the end, but it wasn't because he was brave. It was just because his shoelace got caught. I always liked that scene. It stuck in my head my whole life. Every time I hear that song, I remember that scene of that movie. And then the main purpose of this video is to talk about what makes us Gen X, because for a long time, I've always strongly identified with Gen X, but I wasn't like into living life and working and stuff. I wasn't like into it too much on a social level. But just recently, I started becoming aware of things that other people outside Gen X thought of us, and I realized that that's me. What these traits that they characterize us as a group, they're describing me personally. So I just found that interesting that those things were true about me. So then I've been looking into this more, and that's how I started this podcast, was kind of with that, my curiosity about that, my nostalgia for the 80s and all that. The 80s was, in my opinion, the best decade to be a teenager, to grow up as a teenager. It was just great with all the freedom, coming out of the 70s as a latchkey kid and coming into our teenage years with all that independence and self-reliance. We just get on our bike and go to the mall, or get in a car. After we turn 16, we get in the car and load up with our friends and go somewhere. And it was great times. So, but what does make us Generation X? Because before this, I mean, I kind of knew the age range, but I didn't know the qualities that Gen Xers held as, you know, as a group. So I figured there were more people out there, and maybe y'all might like to know. First of all, Gen X was born between 1965 and 1980. And those dates vary a little bit depending on what article you're reading or what, you know, what expert is telling you. Some people say 79, some people say early 60s or late 60s, whatever. But the widest group of people agree that it's 65 to 79 or 80. So if you were born in those years, if you're turning probably what, 44 this year, if you're turning 44 this year, you're the youngest of our generation. And if you're turning 59 this year, you're the oldest of our generation. So, and then the traits that we're known for, and then the first one and biggest one probably is indifference and apathy. And I made that video about why we don't care, you know, and then I made another video adding to it because so many people commented on the things that I missed. So, you know, we've just been through so many false scares and false apocalypses that, you know, we don't care anymore about that kind of stuff. I mean, we care about family and, you know, life, and we care about the important things, but we know how to separate the important things from the BS, you know what I mean? And we learned that from a young age, and other generations didn't have to go through so much of this turmoil, you know, so many different things. And that, I think that sets us apart. Another thing that is used to describe us is skepticism, which ties right back into the first one. We don't care because we're skeptical and because we want to see proof. You know, you show me. You know, but the zombie apocalypse is coming. Okay, I'll believe it when I see the zombies. Then I'll believe it. You know, until then, you know, I've got work to do. I've got to pay bills. You know, that's just a hallmark of our generation, is that we don't believe it until we see it. So, and I think that ties right back into the reason we don't care, is because we've seen so many false doomsayers and cries of wolf. Oh, this is going to happen, and the economy is going to crash, and it's going to be the end of Western civilization, and we still got to go to work the next day, and the next month, and the next year. So none of it ever amounts to anything. If they wouldn't sensationalize it so much and cry, you know, complete doom and apocalypse on us so often, we would probably be different. But another thing is that in Russia, they're called the children of the Soviets, because, or the last Soviet children or something like that, because they were the last generation to grow up under that USSR before the USSR collapsed, and, you know, they became Russia. So they were that last generation as kids. They were kids when that happened. So that's what they're called over there. And then in Germany, they were kids when the Berlin Wall fell. So they're like the children of the wall or something over there in Germany. There's another interesting thing about why are we called Generation X. I always thought it was like this organic thing because we were so extreme. Everything was extreme. And everything had an X on it. X Games, X this, X that. It was just X's and extreme. And that's why I thought we were Generation X. But it was actually, I guess, taken from a book written by a Canadian guy. And it was the scholars and the thinkers and the studiers, because they've actually done a lot of studies on each generation for educational reasons, and a lot of large businesses have done studies, you know, to to know how to deal with each generation in their workplace. So, what does someone from the 80s expect? And what does someone who was a little kid in the 90s expect? Like that. So there's actually been a lot of research and a lot of money spent studying each generation. So, these are generalities and each individual is different, but there's a lot of truth to these generalities. So, just wanted to put that out there too. This isn't just, fly by the seat of your pants people calling stuff out. There's actually been real long-term, decades-long studies about us and, the boomers and every generation. So we're the generation with the most student loan. And that's because we were when we started going to college, the prices of education started to really rise. Before us, it was cheap comparatively to now. It's just crazy. And then after we graduated college, the job market wasn't spectacular. So we had tough times finding jobs when we got out of college as a general rule. And so we didn't come out with these great jobs and just start hammering away at our student loan debt like other generations were able to do. So we've got the most student loan debt, and we're also the generation that values work-home life balance the most. Like I read that millennials, most of them will be willing to work 80 hours a week, just cram. Not me. I've never been that way. I wanted, to spend time with my family and stuff, and I don't want to be, 75 years old and look back on my life and see nothing but work. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to spend my life that way. Then I guess a lot of you out there, my fellow Gen Xers, feel the same way that I do. So these characteristics, when I do self-introspection, and when I do self-reflection, I see, these generalizations about Gen X, I see them reflected inside myself a lot of the time. So I think there's something to that. I think a lot of us feel the same way in a lot of ways. We're the most nostalgic generation. And I think that goes back to what I said earlier about the 80s being the best decade to grow up in as a teenager. It was just awesome. We had great movies. We had great music. We had freedom, independence, self-reliance. It was just a great time to be a kid growing up. So, and I think that's why we're the most nostalgic, because the 80s was so awesome. Let's face it, No, and we're the least likely group of people to look at each other for the color of our skin. We just don't. That doesn't come into our thinking, you know what I mean? Like it does in other generations. And I just don't remember race being a real in our culture. Now maybe outside, in the grown-up world back then it might have been, bigger. I really don't remember. I'd have to go back through the old news. I'm sure in big cities and stuff. I never lived in like New York or LA or anything like that, so I'm not saying this a blanket statement for everyone. I know everyone went through hard stuff, so I'm not, don't get mad at me for this kind of stuff. But my growing up, I just remember, us looking at each other, and I don't remember ever like race ever being an issue. Your friends, I had friends that were Hispanic, friends that were black, friends that were American Indian. That never came up, you know what I mean? We might joke with each other a little bit, clown a little bit, not, never like derogatory stuff, trying to really insult each other, but just joke around a little bit sometimes. But I don't really remember that, but I'm sure we did. Kids joke around about all kinds of stuff. But to illustrate my point, I think I was in the 3rd grade, and my best friend was a little black kid named William. And we hung out all the time. We played in the playground together. If the teacher had, like group assignments, if you had to pair up, me and William would pick each other and we'd do our work together and stuff. And it was one of these times when we were paired up for an assignment and we're doing our assignment and we're talking, and for some reason William just breaks in the middle of the conversation, and he looks up at me from across our little desk there, and he says, "Hey Jesse, is your daddy in the KKK?" And I remember looking at him, and I didn't understand what he was talking about. I didn't know what that was at that time, and I wasn't sure, but I didn't want to look stupid, by asking him, "Hey, what's that?" So but I knew that my dad wasn't in any, groups or anything. My dad didn't go off to any club. He didn't golf or anything like that. I knew that. So I knew that he wasn't in any group. So I could answer confidently that he wasn't. So I said, "No, is yours?" And William, blew a gasket. "No, no, no." And he had a really strong reaction to my question, my returning question. And I remember as a kid, it's crazy how, you look back and you can look back and remember how you like filtered information, but at the same time with your adult mind, you're like looking at it from the third person. So it is a weird experience when I look back at stuff like that. But I was equally surprised by his reaction, because I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't know why he got so upset, because I asked it back to him. So when I had to wait until I got home, and then I asked my parents, why. I told them the story, and why did William get so upset. Of course, when I told them the story, my dad just busted out laughing. He was rolling on the couch laughing at me because I asked my black friend if his dad was in the KKK. So little kids, we say some crazy stuff, but that's just how little I was taught about race and color, and I was never told not to be friends with anybody of a certain race. If anything came up, I was told that everyone was the same. What are you talking about? That everyone's the same. He's a kid just like you're a kid or whatever. But that stuff never came up. That was the aura, or the general feeling of things when I grew up. And I grew up in that where everybody was the same. There was no difference between anybody. You don't treat anybody different, and that stuff just never came up in my household. You know what I mean? It wasn't, so I never had to deal with that stuff until later on in life. So then I had to start processing that kind of stuff. And I'll leave you there for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Maybe you got a chuckle or two out of it. Maybe you learned a thing or two from it. That'd be awesome too. And if you wouldn't mind, like and subscribe and comment on these things. If you think that some of these things apply to you, or maybe they don't apply to you at all. Maybe you think that that these generalities are BS, which I'm sure a lot of people do. But I've just felt that they do apply to me personally. If you made it this far, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a comment. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time, and I'll see you on the next one.